Hello everybody, thank you for tuning in. It is I, Whimsy, and I'm here to deliver another remote viewing. So this is a pretty interesting remote viewing that I did last night, and I have to say it had a couple surprises to it. So I hope that everyone will, I think everyone will find it interesting. I hope everyone will find it interesting. So the first remote that I did, the first focus I did last night was on the emotional state of Donald Trump after the impeachment. And publicly, the news looks good. It looks like his ratings are up, he's doing great, everybody says, wow, he had a great week, etc., etc. This is the media account of what's going on with Donald Trump. However, when you go into the energy and when you sit in the shoes of Donald Trump using the heart-centered remote viewing technique, that is not how you feel. Quite the opposite. When you go into the energy for Donald Trump at this time, he is lashing out, extremely angry about the impeachment, and he feels that the impeachment is like the mark of Cain. It sits like a mark on his forehead for future generations, and it's driving him absolutely crazy. And the reason, when you go into that further, when you go into the energy further to try and figure out, well, why is it making him so crazy? You realize it's because the narration he has for who he is, based on his narcissism, is that he is perfect. He only has perfect phone calls. He's the perfect president. He alone can fix it. He is perfect. And so the fact that President Trump has been impeached goes against that the narrative of him as the perfect president. So he's obsessing about it. Anything that he sees as a slight, anything that he sees as denying him his perfection, anyone that refuses to acknowledge that he is perfect, you must admit that I am perfect and that the phone call was perfect and everything I do is perfect. When you don't do that, you're punching holes in his defense system. And this is the defense system. When you go further into that energy, this is a defense system that goes back until the age of, say, 3, 4, 5, right around the time when a child learns how to lie in order to avoid suffering. You make up a story in the hopes your parents don't know, you realize you can lie, and then you use it as a backup plan if you find you're in hot water with your parents. So he presents in the remote viewing as lashing out over the impeachment. He feels that he's been marked like Cain on his forehead. He's incapable of saying he is sorry. He wants the impeachment expunged. This has become obsessive for him to the point where his rage is out of control, and he is ignoring Mitch McConnell's advice not to seek vengeance against people that spoke against him. And it goes back to this obsessive need to be right, an obsessive need to be seen as perfect. And so once you understand that pathology, anything that stands as a measure or proof that he is not perfect becomes the thing he obsesses about. So the fact that he was impeached contrasts with his illusion, and it puts a blemish on his reputation and takes away his illusion that he's perfect. He is someone incapable of acknowledging he's made any mistakes, and consequently he has no remorse, which is common in malignant narcissists. When you go into the energy of the Senate, the feeling of the Senate is one of shame. They're starting to feel this shame whether they're able to consciously say so or not. And part of the shame has to do with the fact that some people had the courage to come forward and say, this was wrong. I am a person of faith, and I believe that what happened was wrong. And so what Mitt Romney did was he spoke to the better angels that exist, the good parts that exist in those senators that has begun to feel exactly the same way, but doesn't have the courage to come out and say so publicly. And so this has caused an intense emotional turmoil within some senators. I went back to focusing on the military, and the main thing I got from the military was a continuation of the remote I had done in the past about the military, and that is that many people in the military no longer believe in the mission. They no longer believe that they are fighting the good fight. The peaceful warrior, the honorable warrior who dies to protect his tribe and family, that's no longer how many people in the military feel. So we're seeing a high suicide rate. They no longer believe in the mission. They no longer believe in this president. They believe that the war efforts and what's happened, and that they're being used to help wealthy people get wealthy. So there's this feeling of a lack of faith in the mission, in the military, a lack of faith in America, and that is partly responsible for increases in drug use in the military, suicide, etc. So the other thing that I saw in this remote was that if we approach people from a perspective that we are closed, or we assume that they are prejudiced, or if we attack people as if they are prejudiced, they will respond with prejudice in kind. So if we're trying to build bridges with people that voted for Trump, Republicans, independents, we have to go with an awareness that there is something inherently good in that individual that wants to do good, that wants the truth, that wants what's best for the country. And so there's this energy awareness I had in the remote last night, that acknowledging that Buddha nature in others, it's called Buddhism in everyday life, acknowledging that aspect that exists in others, whoever that person is the beginning of dialogue. And I thought that was kind of interesting. One of the other interesting things about last night's remote was I decided to think of it as a multiverse, where we have done this theoretically innumerable times, that it's chaos theory, that no future is 100% certain. You roll the dice and you think about what the most likely outcomes would be. So say, for example, this world has been destroyed and created over and over again, endlessly throughout time, that there are multiple ways we played this hand. What happens if we play this hand versus that hand? So it was a fun little remote I did, trying to see what the world would look like if candidate A got elected, candidate B got elected, etc., etc. So the first candidate I looked at was Bernie Sanders, and it was kind of interesting because Bernie Sanders gets elected, he becomes the president of the United States, it shocks the world, they can't believe Bernie Sanders got in, and it immediately pulls the economy into something close to a disaster. People pull out of Wall Street, there's a massive global fear, the markets start to tank. And Bernie Sanders starts getting all this negativity that he's created this, that socialism is the source of all evil, and that he's done this to the market. But then slowly, about 2.5 years into, he's still going strong in office, probably because I think he's mostly plant-based. But anyway, he's very healthy. People from Vermont are very health conscious. But anyway, about 2.5 years into Bernie Sanders' presidency, he has completely torn things apart. He has all the corruption, all of the bribes. He cleans house, and so it's economically devastating for about 2.5 years. But after that 2.5 years, the country slowly recovers and President Sanders begins to give money towards green businesses, and he also offers wage stipends to beginning companies. So he starts putting companies, giving them incentive to open up businesses on like the Dakota Sioux Reservation. And then if these small companies are struggling to pay their employees, he also offers a wage stipend from the government so that people can have a living wage just for the first couple of years while these green companies begin to take off. And they do begin to take off with that seed money and with additional help from the government. And we start to see this green vision of healing the planet as the new economy. And Bernie Sanders hails in this kind of utopia, this beautiful green economy, and it was interesting. In the remote, I meditated on what Bernie Sanders would say, and he said some very powerful things. He said, people keep talking about their rights. This is my right, it's my right, it's my right. And what Bernie Sanders was saying in the vision last night was, no, it's not your right. You don't have a right to take from everyone and everything and the earth and just assume it belongs to you without giving anything in return. Bernie Sanders said that's selfish. We are a selfish country. Like, this is selfish. You know, I have a right to this. I have a right to that. I have a right to that too. Don't have to pay taxes. I don't have to recycle. I don't have to do anything. It's me. I have a right. And so what Bernie Sanders was saying in this vision is that's an inherently selfish attitude, and it's simply not true. Future generations will understand this. You have to give something back. You have to give something back in order to allow future generations to enjoy the earth. We have to understand that we're in this together. We have to give something back so that the earth can sustain us and future generations. And that change in our belief systems from me, I have the right to, I don't have the right, I have the moral responsibility to help sustain the earth, help other people so that this can continue. So that was kind of interesting, looking at Bernie Sanders as president, what would happen. I looked also at Mike Bloomberg, and Mike Bloomberg's energy was similar, believe it or not. He started, but there was less of a crash because he is, for all intents and purposes, Wall Street. He was able to he was a much slower integration. I know that he's taken the Billionaires Pledge, where he's giving his income all to charity. He's already given quite a bit to the Environmental Protection Agents, the protection funds, etc. So he was very much more practical. People were still billionaires, people were still wealthy, but he created this nice cushion of healthcare and green capitalism, and it was a little bit more of a moderate shift, but he still did some amazingly great things, Mike Bloomberg. When I went into the energy of Elizabeth Warren, it was something similar to the two of them, Bernie Sanders and Mike Bloomberg, but she was struggling. On the one hand, she agreed with Bernie Sanders, but she was concerned about this huge crash that would hit for a couple of years if they did it the way Bernie Sanders wanted to do it, which is just yank off the Band-Aid. That was Bernie Sanders. It's like, this place is a mess. No, you're all going. We're starting from scratch. Corporate greed. You know, it was very aggressive. Whereas when I went into Elizabeth Warren, it was no, because people were going to lose their jobs. And so she was more radical than Michael Bloomberg, but not quite as radical as Bernie Sanders. And then the last person I looked at what happens when we elect Buttigieg. And with Pete Buttigieg, it was the least amount of progress. It was interesting to go into Pete Buttigieg's energy because I felt like everything was the same, like very little change. There was some environmental efforts made, but it was the slowest progress. What was interesting about Pete Buttigieg is I went into the remote, and he came from a fairly good, maybe middle class, upper middle class family, went to private schools, must have, thought, who knows what the student loan debt is for something like that. And then he does something very unusual. He joins the military. Oh, and he speaks 5 languages. So as I was meditating on Pete Buttigieg, I couldn't help but think, is this guy affiliated with the CIA or some other intelligence agency? The fact that he has a military background and the best education that America can pay for, and he speaks 5 languages, he would be the perfect candidate for to work for the CIA or to have some kind of affiliation with the CIA. So it's very likely there's something going on there where perhaps Buttigieg is the favorite pick for that population, creating stability, military stability, keeping the intelligence agencies in a position of power while offering some progressive ideas. So that was it. Those were the candidates. The last thing I looked at was Lieutenant Colonel Vindman again. I looked at Lieutenant Colonel Vindman again, and what I saw was that he is an archetype, and specifically he is the archetype of the scapegoat. And if you look at I know this, Lena Rodriguez will enjoy this, because sociologist, and I'm an anthropologist, she's a sociologist, and they're very similar studies. But anyway, the function of a scapegoat, or the perfect lamb that was taken out and slaughtered, traditionally in cultures going all the way back to Africa, and these are very ancient ideas, was that the perfect lamb, the unblemished lamb, would be a sacrifice that would take on the sins of the tribe, so that we could then look at our ugly and then atone for it. It's a very strange thing. Like, sometimes they would take this perfect lamb that never did anything wrong, and then they would scream and yell at it and push it off of a cliff. There's mentions of this in the Bible, or some other version of that. And the idea was that the perfect could neutralize the bad, or the perfect could take away the bad. And I feel that Lieutenant Colonel Vindman is the scapegoat. He is the scapegoat. He is the innocent lamb, the virgin wool, who was the perfect employee for the military, who has been traipsed up and is the symbol of everything that is ugly and abhorrent in this current administration. And he is also the antidote, and he is the magic potion, in the sense that if the nation begins to focus on Vindman, what about Vindman? What about Vindman? If that becomes the mantra, it will probably take this presidency out of the hands of Donald Trump. Whether it's as a hashtag, if we all do hashtag, what about Vindman? If we make it a song, if you make it a march, you can maybe do a little Kentucky bluegrass, it can be a mantra. What about Vindman? What about Vindman? What about Vindman? It can be a gospel song, who knows? But the point is this: there is so much energy around what happened, and there's so much animosity around what happened to Vindman, that it has the power to break the spell that this president has over his base. All right, I want to thank everybody for watching this video from the Oracle of Whimsy, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Peace out.